Mind Zen. Tonight's Dharma talk is given by Robert Koho Epstein.
Our old friend, the Buddha, our grandfather of the teachings, or great grandfather, is sometimes known as the first psychologist, or a very, very early representative of psychology. I don't know. We don't remember what it was like all the way back then, but people were not into doing a whole lot of work with the inner state, except for the yogis who did it in a slightly different way. Anyway, he was very ahead of his time in looking at mental and emotional factors and seeing the importance of how we created suffering internally, how to understand mental and emotional states, how to regard them and work with them. And it's one of the subjects that I'm interested in right now, as we're in a very turbulent time. As it says in the old Chinese curse, we are living in interesting times, which to them was not a good thing. It seems like a time, represented by things happening, and then you have to deal with them, where understanding how to work with our internal states seems like an important thing to do, because a lot of us are getting upset by a lot of things that are happening right now in a turbulent period. And since we're involved with Buddhism, we should be able to hopefully get something out of our practice and out of the Buddhist philosophy that will be helpful. So I would just like to look at a few ideas of the Buddhist analysis and how they seem to be interconnected to each other, from my point of view, and apply it in a way that may be beneficial. It's not exactly Buddhist psychotherapy. I'm not sure that Buddha would, sit down and ask you how you're feeling, although who knows? It's a little more like Buddhist structural psychology. And it's a bit of a sketch or an outline, which could be looked into in a lot more depth and probably has been in various ways. But connecting these ideas may shed a little bit of light on certain interconnections or cross-references in the way that we may practice. So first, in my my intention here to be redundant, I'm going to do a quick review of the three areas that are involved here, and then I'm going to talk about their interconnection a little bit. The first one is the good old five aggregates, known as the five skandhas. I've talked about them a few times and thought about them a lot, and they're really pretty interesting. And sometimes they are known, as I will probably say again later, the five clinging aggregates, because one of the points of Buddha's teaching on the five skandhas is that we create dukkha, we create suffering of various types by clinging to our experiences and to the objects of our experience. And while clinging sounds like you want to have the experiences and keep them, there's also the other version of clinging, which is clinging to not having certain experiences or objects in our lives, which is also known as aversion. So you have clinging and aversion. And when things go away and we want them back, that's known as craving, which is another version of clinging. It's like clinging to something that we don't have at the moment that we want. The five skandhas is one of the most variably translated things on earth. So there are a lot of different terms that come up. I think these ones are pretty good. They're the five skandhas as translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's one of the more important translators in Theravada. And he's one of the guys that called it the five aggregates of clinging. And these five aggregates are form. So there you have the physical body and the material world, feeling, and the way that Bhikkhu Bodhi described it, which I kind of like, is sensations that are positive, negative, or indifferent, which is sometimes translated as neutral. And that's a nice combo, because sometimes feelings in the skandhas are translated as sensations, and it's treated like that in mindfulness meditation. And then sometimes they use the old Buddha's old definition, which is their reactions to things that are positive, negative, or neutral. Well, he put the two together, so it ends that split. So if you were to touch some yicky, muddy stuff outside in the garden that had worms in it, and by accident, and you go, that's oh, that's horrible. That's that initial reaction that something is either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. When I'm walking down the street and I'm going street, 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 the street's pretty neutral. I'm not really paying a lot of attention to it, and I don't have much of a reaction to it. But if I twist my ankle, then the street becomes very bad, and I'm mad at the street. So those sensations can have different impacts depending on how they strike you. Then I could have something very positive. You know, I find that I have a new. This is not me. But you have a new baby in the family, and you pat its hair, and it's so soft, and wow, that's really amazing, and you have a pleasant feeling from that. So you really like that feeling. So that's feeling. And the third aggregate is translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi as perception. And that's just the basic ability to recognize what something is. So you need to have that. Otherwise, you're just having random experiences like a little baby and not really understanding what they are. So perception recognizes things through the senses. So I not only feel the hardness of the rock and go, that's pretty pleasant, but I also see it, feel it, know it, and go, that's a rock. So I perceive the object. The fourth factor of experience or skanda or aggregate is volitional formations, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi. And they include mental habits, thoughts, ideas, opinions, prejudices, compulsions. Those are the ones he lists. I also put emotions in there. I don't know why he left that out, but that's okay. I think that, complex emotional states and those sorts of things are part of those volitional formations. And sometimes I've seen that translated. I can't find it lately, but sometimes I've seen that translated, that fourth skanda, as proliferations, which is one that I really like. And it's kind of like the way I'm looking at it in context of this talk. So you have these basic experiences, basically they're pleasant or unpleasant. You're going through life, stuff happens, something hurts, ouch, that's unpleasant. Then it goes away and you're finished with it. You go on with your life. But when you get to that fourth skanda, that doesn't happen. Through your mental habits, opinions, prejudices, compulsions, tendencies, complex emotional states, you take these experiences and hang on to them and make sure you keep suffering longer. So you stub your toe. Is my toe okay? It's swelling up a little bit. Am I going to be all right? Is it more hurt than I think it is? Maybe I should go to the doctor, but maybe I shouldn't. Not sure if my healthcare covers this. Maybe I shouldn't go. Let me see how it develops. I'll put some ice on it, but somebody else said to put heat on it. So the fourth skanda, volitional formations, makes a big mess out of your experiences, builds on them and turns them into a nice pile of suffering material that you can work with. And that will go for a lot of different types of thoughts and ideas and beliefs and such. So I may have something, which I do actually, I have experiences from the past that, maybe from 20 or 30 years ago that come up from time to time and bother me. It's like, why did that happen? Why did I do that back then? I wish I could redo that. I'd like to do that over. All of those sorts of dealings with the past, things that bother us that aren't actually there anymore. Those are all in that fourth pesky skanda. And the fifth skanda is just consciousness. It's what allows us to be aware of all the other aggregates. Now, we could see a a rock, we could touch the rock, we could have a reaction to the rock, we could build proliferations or formations around our experience of the rock, memories and expectations and thoughts about the rock. But none of that is going to register at all if we don't have consciousness. Without consciousness, I think in this case, it's consciousness is coming from, there's a lot of different words for consciousness in Buddhism. I think this one is Vedana, Vedana. I think that's the one. It might be Chitta, though. I get them mixed up. So it's one of those, the one that is consciousness of something as it's happening, or that is part of the perceptual process of seeing and recognizing something. So it's that kind of consciousness which gives us awareness of the other factors. And Buddha basically said that this package of 5 formations, that's it. That defines a human being. If you're a conscious being who is in touch with physical objects, has mental experiences, emotional experiences, and is conscious of things happening through the senses and in the mind, that's it. That's what you're a human being. Congratulations. He kind of broke us down into a very basic package. But that 4th skandha, the volitional formations or proliferations or mental factors, whatever you want to call them, is what causes all the special human experience that is both beautifully creative, imaginative, and extremely troublesome. Animals don't have a whole lot of 4th skandha activity, Chase a rabbit, rabbit gets away, end of story. No more rabbit. You would think that with Zen practice, if you're sitting a lot and you're getting into a state of relative equanimity, and you are observing thoughts and feelings and letting them take their course, and you can get to a point where there's not a whole lot of troublesome stuff going on in the 4th skandha. I haven't experienced that yet. I still have a lot of 4th skandha going on, but maybe there's some other people. I know there's one advanced person who's in their 80s on in the Zen community who laughed about somebody saying that they didn't have any thoughts and said, well, you're way ahead of me. I've only been practicing for 50 years and I still have plenty of thoughts, but it's possible that some of that stills or at least gets into a context where it's not as troublesome. So let's keep that 4th aggregate in mind. Going along with the 4th aggregate, I'd like to connect it to another little idea of Buddha's, which is the simile of the 2 arrows. So Buddha says that we have all kinds of things happen to us that are not happy events. We basically, we get sick. We lose a loved one. We get older. We get arthritis and our body starts creaking. We have a troublesome relationship and get into a horrible argument, and it leaves a lot of poisonous emotion in our system. He says that's difficult, and that causes suffering, but that's all 1st arrow suffering. That's stuff that actually happens to you. He says, but what we do as human beings, which is kind of a mistake, is instead of taking the 1st arrow out and saying, okay, this was an upsetting experience, let me resolve it and move on, we shoot ourselves with a 2nd arrow to make it worse. And that 2nd arrow is psycho-spiritual arrow. It's another psychological analysis of the Buddhas. He says most of the suffering that goes along with these events takes place in our own minds because we're busy making stuff up about it and causing more suffering. We don't let it go. So I have a fight with somebody, and again, I start thinking, God, I can't believe that happened. Why did that person do that? I never expected them to behave that way. They really don't like me. I thought this person was a really good friend, but that's so painful to realize that actually they're capable of talking to me the way they did. And I can't believe how insulting it was what they said to me. That's terrible, man. How am I going to be friends with them again? And you just keep going. You could go for years that way. I know people who have gone for years that way. I may have even done it myself. But Buddha says, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You could just have a fight and then drop it. You could actually do that. Most of the things that the Buddha is prescribing here to save us the trouble of having endless, dukkha upon dukkha, suffering upon suffering, one arrow after the other. Oh, that second arrow hurts so much. I can't believe I'm thinking all these horrible thoughts. I think I'll shoot myself with a third arrow to get rid of the second one. And we make it even worse. But most of the things that Buddha says about not doing those things to ourselves really takes Buddhist practice. So if you just think, I'm not going to do that anymore, it's probably not going to work. But if you sit and you look at the way these formations work, then you have a good chance of making a difference and starting to subside those things to some extent. So what does the Buddha say to do about it? What's the practice? Well, we have various meditation objects and meditation techniques in Zen, but the very basic original way of dealing directly with these emotional and mental formations in the fourth skandha, the one where we make stuff up and invent these complex mental formations and emotions, also known now in the Robert version of Buddhism, also known as the second arrow, because I really see those two as being part of the same description. He says, well, why not look at these things and see how they work? And that's where Buddha, the psychologist, comes in. He's given you a good psychological analysis of how you create suffering already, but then he has a technique for looking at it. And so that system is covered in Buddha's technique of satipatthana. And satipatthana is usually translated as the four foundations of mindfulness. He gives you four levels or four types of human experience where you can apply mindfulness and see what the nature of something is instead of just being sort of run around by it in an automatic or conditioned way. And that allows you to get some space and some understanding that changes the way that you relate to those reactions and experiences. When you proliferate something, you build on it and increase it, using it as a springboard for greater intensity in your reaction, and it yields you a more upsetting and painful internal state, which then keeps building on itself and is difficult to dispel or resolve. So that's what we've been talking about. But through mindfulness, in the Satipatthana Sutta, in the third foundation of mindfulness, so we've got the fourth skandha, the second arrow, and now we've got the third foundation of mindfulness. Forget about the first two. They're not that important. Go straight to the third. That's, if you don't have time to practice four foundations, the third one is the best one to focus in on. If I remember correctly, the first ones are like sensation and emotion or something like that. And they're obviously something. But what happens in the third one is we're dealing with these mental and emotional formations. So we're hitting right onto the fourth skandha, which creates our second arrow. So what does the Buddha say to do about it? He says, watch the formation of a mental or emotional state. Use mindfulness to determine whether it's a skillful or unskillful, wholesome or unwholesome, helpful or unhelpful, and then see whether it causes an increase or a decrease in your internal suffering. And he encourages the development of skillful factors. We should encourage the development of skillful factors and discourage or allow to pass those states that cause greater internal suffering. When we look at the context of an experience, internal or external, that it's arising within the conscious experience of ourselves as experiencing beings, we get more mindfulness, more space in order to allow those things to take their proper place instead of being subject to them. So what do? You look at the state that's arising and you say to yourself, oh, I can see how this is rising in my mind and causing a certain kind of response. I can see how it develops. I can see how it's maintained for a certain period of time. And then I can see how it falls away. So when you watch the thing go by like that without giving it a whole lot of interference and without judgment, you just watch it arise, watch it hang out, and watch it go away again. You don't tend to keep those things around as long and start creating greater and longer sufferings out of them. And you do the same thing with the positive states. When you see a helpful state arise, like, oh, this is a happy state. This is, this is actually encouraging or empowering, or in some other way, it's a positive state. Watch how it arises. What are the factors that bring it up? How it hangs around, and then it goes away too. But by watching these things with mindfulness and without judgment, there's a tendency, I believe the Buddha is saying, for these helpful factors to develop and become more common, and for the negative ones, as we see that they're not really helping us, that we allow them to fall away and don't hold on to them. And here's a rundown of the third foundation of mindfulness from my favorite source of Buddhism, Google AI. The third foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of the mind, also known as citta. So it is that citta, which means mind or consciousness. It's the practice of observing your mental states, including your emotions, thoughts, and consciousness. What does mindfulness of the mind involve? Noticing emotions, being aware of your emotions, such as joy, anger, fear, grief, and desire, identifying the three poisons, being aware of the presence or absence of greed, hate, and delusion. And I don't know about you, but if I'm mindful and I notice that I've got this horrible anger building up, it tends to cut it off. If I become conscious of it, I'm not going to keep on growing that. Now, some people might, but if you have a little bit of awareness, a little bit of practice, and you know that's not good for you, and you see that that anger is building up, you're going to say, I don't want to be that angry, and you're going to let it go. Assessing your mental state, being aware of whether your mind is concentrated or distracted, free or not yet free, realizing you are not your thoughts, becoming aware that you're not your thoughts or your state of mind. So you've got a little bit of mindfulness giving you distance from the state and not identifying fully with it. So that's a little bit from Google AI. My thought about it, and going back to what the Buddha said about it, is to really observe how it arises, maintains, and goes away, so that you're able to take advantage of the natural cycle of thoughts and emotions. And if you are observing those things, you're not building on them. You're not going like, oh, that's bad. That's bad what happens. I feel bad about that. I'm going to, like really get into it and make myself feel worse. So we have that cross-reference between the third foundation of mindfulness, the fourth skanda, and the second arrow. And that method of working with the mind to see which formations are the words in original Pali are kusala and akusala. They're sometimes translated as skillful and unskillful, sometimes translated as wholesome and unwholesome. So you can look at those words if you're interested and see how they give you the two alternatives that Buddha said, these are either good for you or they're not so great for you. And he provides you with that method for releasing or minimizing those conditioned reactions. So the way I see it is that if you were just to be mindlessly getting angry about something, the anger goes up, 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 up. It gets really bad. It poisons your system. And then maybe at some point it's going to subside, but after doing some damage. But if you use mindfulness and you notice that anger, building up, you're going to go, oh, that doesn't feel really great. And the rise and fall is going to kind of curve off, go to a certain point and fall away. So just to connect all of this to a little bit of a Zen perspective, I would like to, I know I've gone a little bit too long for the session, but I want to end with these quotes from a couple of Zen masters. So the first ones are quick quote from Shunryo Suzuki Roshi from the Soto Zen perspective, who has that absolutely wonderful, simple formulation of how to work with thoughts and feelings. He says, just regard thoughts like clouds in the sky. They're going through your mind, and let them go by and do their thing. Just don't worry about them. And if you're not engaging with them, but you're observing them, you can see what they are, but you're not like proliferating on them. You're not building on them. You also had another really nice metaphor, very Japanese, of saying that leave your front and back door open so that thoughts can go freely in and out of your mind. Just don't invite them to tea. And I think that's a nice way of looking at it. You're not going to engage and get overly involved in a particular thought or emotion that bothers you. Instead, you're going to just acknowledge it and let it go its way. It's a very different way of dealing with our internal states. And then I'd like to end with my favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes from Korean master Song-san. I know who's somebody who's quite popular around here. If your mind is not holding anything, and just notice how these things are just like the third foundation of mindfulness, that satipatthana technique, where you just observe things, see how they work, and let them go. If your mind is not holding anything, it's clear like space. Clear like space means that sometimes clouds come, sometimes rain or lightning or airplane comes, or even a missile blows up. Boom, world explodes. But the air is never broken. This space is never broken. Yeah, other things are broken, but this space is never changing. Even if a nuclear bomb explodes, doesn't matter. Space is space. That mind is very important. If something in your mind explodes, then don't hold it. Then it will disappear. Sometimes anger mind appears, but soon disappears. But if you hold it, you have a problem. Appear, disappear, that's okay. Don't hold. Then it becomes wisdom. My anger mind becomes wisdom. My desire mind becomes wisdom. Everything becomes wisdom. That's interesting, yeah? It's still him talking. So don't hold. That's a very important point. Thank you.